Are you getting ready for a solo retirement, but you're not really sure how that's going to work? Hi, I'm Garrett Ray, financial planner here at the Wealth Guardians and the Ray Financial Group.
And I'm Brice Payne, and you've entered the Vault, the Wealth Guardians video series on all things pertaining to retirement planning. In this episode, we're going to talk about what you need to consider if you're planning for a solo retirement and how those considerations might be different from those who are planning a household or a couple retirement. Don't forget to hit these like and subscribe buttons down below the screen there if you want to catch future episodes of The Vault with Doug, Garrett, and myself. All right, Garrett, let's go ahead and get started on this.
Yeah, Brice. So, things can change a little bit when we're talking about, perhaps a married couple that's entering retirement, but things can change if we're just talking about an individual who's looking at retirement in the near horizon. And, I kind of like to go back to, the basics here. And one of those is sources of income. So
Yeah.
how does that look different for, let's say, an individual versus a married couple?
Well, obviously, there's probably going to be fewer sources of income,
Sure.
right? And
More than likely.
when you consider income to expenses, more often than not, when you are a married couple, you've got two sources. You got two social securities. You might have two pensions.
You might. Yep.
So the more income that you've got, that doesn't mean that you can have double the income in retirement, but it doesn't mean that your expenses are doubled. You're sharing a house or whatnot.
Yep.
So oftentimes, I hate to say it, but a married couple might be in a better financial situation than somebody who's planning a solo retirement.
Sure.
Because their expenses aren't going to drop that much from a married couple, but their income might drop quite a bit
Sure.
from a
Yep.
and this is just a typical, obviously if you're a landlord and staying a landlord in retirement and you got pensions and whatnot, you very well might be still okay, but the ratio of income to expenses for a married couple is often less
Yep.
than somebody who is an individual, only has a few sources of income or one source of income and higher expenses. So that's one thing. That's your sources of income versus your expense. So another thing that you want to take a look at, and this is whether you're married or solo, you want to take a look at the assets that you have.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
So that's one thing that you've got to get all organized and situated if you're planning for retirement. And then we got to take a look at tax mitigation strategies.
Right. Does it make sense, do some of the strategies that we might, go forward with a couple, does that make sense on the individual level?
Right.
Is the juice really worth the squeeze?
So that's something that might be easier and works in the individual's thing.
Mm-hmm.
For example, one thing that you might do if you are a married couple is you want to protect the other person should something happen to you. And IRA to Roth conversions can often be one of those strategies. It also helps with inheritance, what kind of monies the kids are inheriting. Well,
Right.
if you're an individual, that takes off the table one of the benefits of doing IRA to Roth conversions.
Agreed.
Mitigation strategy.
There's no surviving spouse to have to protect. There's presumably no kids to inherit
Right.
possibly tax-free monies. So,
Right. So tax mitigation strategies can change a little bit to when you are
okay.
for a solo retirement than for a married one. Now the next question would be is what's different specifically between these things? So let's
Sure.
take a look at life insurance.
Okay. Yeah.
As you've heard us say before, you usually buy life insurance to solve some kind of problem.
Mm.
And that problem, oftentimes, not always the case, but oftentimes is that if something were to happen to you as the main income provider for the family, you want to make sure that those remaining in the family, the spouse, presumably, kid or two, you want to make sure that they're going to be okay
Yeah.
without your source of income.
Right. If I'm gone, then what's protecting my surviving spouse and possible children?
Right.
Yeah.
So if you are an individual, no kids, no spouse,
The spouse.
that takes that problem that you were trying to solve off the table
Right.
entirely. So there might not be as much need for a life insurance as there
Sure.
was for a married couple.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't that you want to protect your beneficiaries or whatnot. You wanted to leave, somebody else an inheritance. Well, if you don't have kids, then that problem as well might be off the table.
And one other problem that we see that people try to solve with life insurance sometimes is say, oh, my spouse is fully capable of working, but I want to make sure that there's enough of a death benefit so that at least the house can be paid off.
Right.
So, right, he or she doesn't have to worry about, keeping up that mortgage payment, just an added level of stress.
On the street.
Exactly. So if, and if we're talking about a solo, an individual retirement, perhaps that's not a concern anymore.
Right. If you pass away and the mortgage is still going on, who does that hurt?
It goes back to the bank.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So not a need for insurance in that case then either. There's another type of insurance out there that the strategy of is it appropriate for you changes from a married household to an individual, and that's long-term care insurance. Now, the interesting thing about this is it could affect you in one of two directions. It could, depending on your mindset, it could be that long-term care insurance is more important to you if you're not married, or it could be less important to you.
That's okay. So two schools of thought.
There's two schools of thought.
Yeah.
So think of it this way. Oftentimes, long-term care insurance, if you purchase that, it's not to protect you. It's to protect the spouse. And here's what I mean by that. If you have to go into a long-term care facility, that's going to run, if you have a private room, in at least in our neck of the woods, North Carolina, that's going to run you between $7,000 and $8,000 a month.
A month.
That's going to dry up the resources that were meant for the spouse.
Right. Especially if, perhaps you're still paying a mortgage on top.
Choice.
Yeah.
Right. So that could cause a real problem if you had the assets for taking care of yourself, but you want to protect the spouse as well. So if you're individual, now maybe that's not an issue for you.
Right? Not be.
But here's the way it could work in the opposite direction. If you are married and you are of the mindset, and I'm not saying this is the appropriate mindset to be in, but if you are of the mindset, I'm going to take care of my spouse if something happens to her, he or she's going to take care of me if something happens to me. Okay, if that can work out that way, great. It often doesn't, so I don't want you to rely on that mentality. But if that is your thought process, then if you want to have long-term care, right? Or you don't want to have long-term care because you're going to take care of the other person, or the other person is going to take care of you. But if you're an individual, then who's going to take care of you? So now you might want long-term care insurance, because what's the option? If you don't have the resources for that, you could end up in a Medicaid facility. If you're fine with that, great. Not saying there's anything bad with those, but I think it's commonly understood that the facilities that are relying on Medicaid don't get the resources that a private type of institution would. So it might not be as nice, but I don't want to disparage Medicaid facilities. They're great to be out there, but some people might say, I'd rather be either in my own place or in a facility that does not rely on Medicaid. So if you're an individual under that situation, it might be more important to you to have long-term care insurance. And, there's different types of long-term care insurance out there, but the difference between being an individual and a married household, that thinking on whether or not long-term care insurance is necessary can kind of be turned on its head.
Sure.
Those two things.
Would absolutely agree.
And then the last thing that can change between a married household and a individual who's planning for retirement is taxes.
Yep.
So there's two new things about taxes when you retire. There is how your Social Security is going to be taxed. That's a whole different conversation. But really what it is either 0% of your Social Security is going to be taxed, 50% of it's going to be taxed, or 85% of it is going to be taxed, depending on the total income that you coming into the household. So you have to be prepared for that. If you're an individual, it might very well be that the tier for taxing on Social Security you're able to stay under, and have 0% of your Social Security taxed. If you've got two Social Security checks coming in because you're a married household, it's very hard to stay under that 0 tier. So you're probably going to be paying 50% at least, if not 85% of your Social Security being taxed.
Yep.
Now, Medicare falls into kind of a similar
bucket.
More income that you have, the higher you're going to pay for your Medicare premiums.
Yep.
Well, if you're an individual, you've got a better shot of being in that lowest tier. So it actually works in your favor in a lot of ways to be a individual retiree than
when it comes to your
in that one aspect alone.
Sure.
Those are just some of the things that are different between a married household and an individual household preparing for retirement.
Absolutely, Brice. Is there anything that we left out?
Well, I'm sure that there is, but this is the main ones that we were thinking of as we were preparing this episode of the but anyway, I hope that was helpful for you. Thank you for tuning in. I'll, again, bring your attention to those like and subscribe buttons down there. If you want to catch future episodes with The Vault with Doug, Garrett, and myself, well, then you got to click on those. So go ahead and do that. And other than that, we hope to see you at the next one. I'm Brice Payne.
And I'm Garrett Ray.
And this has been The Vault.